Hello, and welcome to the Wine Educate podcast. This is episode 71, and I'm your host, Joanne Close. Today, we're wrapping up our Wine Laws of Burgundy series, and we are finishing up with the Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais. It's interesting, the history of these two regions, because they're often overlooked. And I think these regions, in particular, the Mâconnais, represent some really good, sneaky deals. These regions are part of Burgundy, but are not often thought of in the same vein as, say, the Côte d'Or, which is kind of crazy if you think about how close they are. So first, we're going to start with the Côte Chalonnaise, which is just below the Côte d'Or. They're so close, the regions are only 3 miles apart. And you may say, well, isn't it just an extension of the Côte d'Or? Well, it is technically a little bit different here. So let's talk about the geography and why it makes it different. So from north to south, it's about 22 miles, and then roughly 4 or 5 miles wide. And it has a slightly higher elevation than the Côte d'Or. We're looking at about 230 to 400 meters. And with this slightly higher elevation, the ripening is going to be challenged a bit. So the harvest is going to be a bit later. Ripening is less reliable. Therefore, quality is going to suffer a little bit. I laugh because Jancis Robinson certainly has her own opinions and quite a wicked sense of humor, if I must say. And that only rarely comes across in the Oxford Companion because that's technically a dictionary, right? That's not the time for jokes. But in the World Atlas, she's co-author in that. And oh boy, tell me how you really feel, Jancis, about the Côte Chalonnaise. So these are quotes from that book, which I thought were quite funny and gives an idea of how they're a little different. So in reference to the Côte Chalonnaise, she says, they are paper copies of the Côte d'Or wines, sometimes rustic, but definitely improving. Okay, room for improvement there. And this other one really gets me. So we're talking about Côte d'Or, maybe a bit more prestigious, and then referring to the Côte Chalonnaise wines as like slightly undernourished country cousins. Wow. So clearly Jancis doesn't think the Côte Chalonnaise can hold a candle to the Côte d'Or. However, I would beg to differ a little bit here. Certainly the wines are different. Certainly they're lighter and they're not as big and they're not as powerful. But they are right next door and they are some really lovely wines to be found at a fraction of the price in these regions. So what are our main grapes here? Now, we do find other grapes planted in Burgundy. To be clear, it's not 100% Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but those are still the dominant grapes in this region. You have a regional appellation, which is actually quite new. So in 1990, the Bourgogne Côte Chalonnaise AOC appellation, which covers all the wines made here from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But we have these village appellations. We'll talk about the village appellations that your level 3 book highlights, right? Because this is the point. We want to learn this information at the WSET level 3 level. And that would be Rouy. So Rouy produces more white than red, and is also important for sparkling. Aha! So this is where the Crémant de Bourgogne comes from. Mercurey is probably the most famous and the one that Jancis says has the most potential, and it's been around a while. So in 1936, this was a recognized appellation. So largest, most prestigious, high reputation. Givry is the smallest, but also has a strong reputation, particularly for reds. And we have Montagny, produces only white wines. So there's one that your book does not mention, but I'm going to mention it because, quite frankly, it's the most fun to say, and it illustrates a point I was trying to make last week. So this region is Bouzeron. I mean, who doesn't want to say that? Bouzeron. And if you remember, I was talking about Domaine Romanée-Conti, DRC, the super highly sought after culty wines that go for thousands of dollars a bottle. Well, one of the gentlemen who had a huge part in the success of those wines, Aubert de Villaine, with his wife, Pamela, purchased a vineyard in Bouzeron. It's called A&P de Villaine. Now his nephew runs it, but the few occasions I've had a chance to try these wines, I thought they were absolutely spectacular, really good value, and you can easily get a bottle for under $100. Not hundreds or thousands, but under $100. So I would go to your local friendly bottle shop and see if they have any, or if you know when they're coming in, because it's small production and these things, they come in, they come out, but if you're on the radar, maybe you could get yourself a couple of bottles. Now, within the Côte Chalonnaise and Mâconnais, we do have some Premier Crus vineyards, but no Grand Cru, okay? So no Grand Cru is being awarded here. Now, further south, we have the Mâconnais. Now, if the Côte Chalonnaise was being referred to as malnourished cousins, I don't know what Jancis would say about the poor Mâconnais. Actually, she has good things to say about the value to be found for the Chardonnay produced here. And indeed, about 90% of the wines produced here are made from Chardonnay. It is 31 miles north to south and 9 miles wide. I mentioned this before, but the slides of Mâconnais really do look like Middle-earth. The hobbits live here. And considering now Gamay starts to sneak in, I certainly think the Gamay would be the drink of choice for a hobbit, don't you? Here we have these gently rolling hills, and polyculture starts to come in. So that's when you don't just plant grapes, but you've got apricots and other plants, other crops planted with the vines as well. And the aspect of the slope is less reliable. So you don't get these kind of consistent southeast facing slopes. They're just on the rolling hills. So that is not a benefit you get reliably. What are the appellations like? Okay. Now, the main point I want to drive home about these appellations is that some of them are really recent. So it just shows how the Mâconnais is still being discovered. Some earlier books on Burgundy didn't even include the poor Mâconnais. They just left it off. But here, I think if you're a young winemaker and if you're looking to get some land and establish yourself and not break the bank, I think the Mâconnais could be a good region to do this in. In 1937, the Mâcon AOC was established for red or white. These are like entry-level wines. And then in 1958, Mâcon Village AOC was established, and these for white wines only. In this region, you have Mâcon, and it can be followed by one of the village names. It can be more specific, like Mâcon-Logny. In 1971, the Saint-Véran AOC was established and started gaining recognition. And the one that you probably will recognize and have had before, I'm sure, is Pouilly-Fuissé AOC. This is the star of the Mâconnais. It is only Chardonnay, and the vineyards are planted on these southeast facing slopes that act as these natural sun traps. And we all know the sun helps the grapes ripen, better quality. And some Premier Crus were established here as recently as 2020. Ooh, so interesting. The wine world is still developing and still carving out these better parcels and giving them appellations. So there you have it. That's the Côte Chalonnaise and the Mâconnais, representing good value and possibly some new exciting sites to explore. You could go get yourself some Premier Cru and play around with it because it's affordable. All right? Okay, I asked you in the newsletter this week, where do you want to go next? Meaning, which wine laws do you want me to cover next week? I gave you a couple of choices, and overwhelmingly, Piedmont was the favorite. So next week, I'm going to start tackling the wine laws of northern Italy, and that should be great fun. So if you have not already subscribed, please do so. And if you are not on the newsletter, I think you should be on the newsletter because I'm sending all kinds of good things out there. No matter what level you're at currently, there is a tip in there for you. So this week I had a little wine Jeopardy game from my level 1 students and a good old juicy essay question from my level 3 students to tackle. If you'd like to join up for the newsletter, you go to wineeducate.com and it is the green button at the top, that says newsletter sign up. All right, friend, have a lovely weekend, and we'll start with Italy next week.